Welcome, I'm Hernan Murdoch. In this episode, we're going to take a closer look at work papers. Work papers are a very important aspect of every engagement, whether they're assurance related or compliance and or consulting. And they are the documentation that we keep. So let's take a look at some of the key things about them, especially the standards
Mm-hmm.
that guide our practice and that define what quality is all about. To help us with that, Kathleen Crawford, who has a lot of experience in internal auditing, is going to accompany us and walk us through some of these key aspects of what good work papers look like. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hello, Hernan.
So we have these standards that are the rule book for internal auditors,
Mm-hmm.
and they speak very specifically about work papers and some of the things we need to keep in mind. So, what are some of these standards? And let's talk about what they mean.
Okay. Let's start off by talking about documenting information in general. And before I launch into specific standards, I like to remind people that the work papers are one of two main deliverables of the audit process. So this deliverable is our inward-facing deliverable. We keep this, but where we may have to share some information from it. So it needs to tell the story of what the auditors do, what the auditors find, and what the auditors conclude. So we'll see that sort of arc in these IIA standards as we go through the different graphics. So first off, 2330, documenting information. It's pretty straightforward. Internal auditors must document sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful information to support our conclusions and engagement results. So those four aspects of information are there: sufficient, reliable, relevant, and useful. And enough of it, work that's relevant, and that is supportive of improvement where necessary. And then,
Interestingly enough, those are the same attributes we were looking at as relates to evidence as well. So
yes,
when we think
yes,
about those attributes, keep that in mind as well.
yeah.
So very important, connecting the dots in a way.
Well, and I think that the IIA shied away from using the term evidence in their standards, but they like
Hmm.
information. It's not as scary. It's not as legal. But
Right.
we use the terms interchangeably, as you said. 2330.A1 and A2, if people remember the way that our standards are arranged, if there's no suffix, it's a standard that applies to everything. If there is a suffix beginning with the letter A, it applies to assurance engagements, and that's the case with these two here. 2330.A1 talks about the importance, the chief audit executive, so the person in charge of the audit function, must control access to engagement records. There's a lot of sensitive information in audit engagement records, and so it's incumbent upon the chief audit executive to make sure that it is not exactly restricted, but that somebody needs to sort of be the gatekeeper, and that's the chief audit executive. And this must be done with the approval of senior management and or legal counsel prior to releasing such records. So if conditions warrant it, warrant us releasing things to external parties as appropriate, it still has to consult with legal or with senior management.
So definitely on a need to know basis only. Very good.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly.
All right.
A2 speaks to record retention. So we need to keep our engagement records intact for a period of time. It doesn't matter where the record is stored, there needs to be a plan for how long we're going to keep it around. And these, there's no, the standard doesn't say a certain period of time, just that it has to be consistent with the organization's guidelines and any pertinent regulations. So if there are requirements in our state or locality or if there are expectations in our particular industry, then we might lean into those. But the requirements should be consistent with guidelines that the organization as a whole has.
Right. Very good. Yes. And as a reminder to our viewers as well, that this is a policy that is often reviewed by internal auditors as well. What does the organization have in place for
Mhm.
document and data retention, and also for the destruction of those? How is that going to be handled?
Mhm.
And making sure that all copies of documents are considered when this happens. But this applies to these documents as well. Very important. Okay, so as far as the supervision or oversight, you mentioned what the chief audit executive must do in terms of controlling access to those documents. What else about supervision is important for us to know about?
Well, in the next graphic, we have standard 2340. It's pretty cut and dried, but the interpretation helps us. So engagements must be properly supervised. I'm putting properly in quotation marks because that's what really gets explained in the interpretation.
Mhm.
Properly supervised to ensure that objectives are achieved, that quality is assured, and that staff is developed. So, threefold expectations or objectives with regard to engagement supervision. So, the interpretation has to do with looking at the delegates, looking at what auditors are capable of doing already. So, what's the nature of their education, what's the nature of their experience thus far. So the extent of supervision will depend on proficiency and experience. So how long has somebody been auditing? What kinds of projects have they done before? And so the chief audit executive needs to have that overall responsibility for supervising the engagement. But as a practical matter, different aspects are going to be designated to different people depending on their, again, proficiency and experience. And there should be, most importantly, there has to be evidence of that supervision. So many experienced auditors are well familiar with something that's called coaching notes. So coaching notes are commonly given as a representation of some supervision or some review of the work product.
And is it important as well when we think about the product itself, because we're not only talking about the documents in and of
Mhm.
themselves, we're also talking about the people behind the documentation. So we want to document well, we want to make sure there's quality in them, but also that we're going to think of them as a tool to help develop the auditors
Mhm.
so they get better as they advance in their career. So this is
Yeah.
also a training opportunity. And I remember many instances, whether I was doing the work or I was reviewing the work, where those coaching moments were very helpful to help me become a better writer, a better documenter,
Mhm.
and so on. So we need to keep in mind that the purpose is multifaceted as relates to that.
And there's some
Uh,
groups that have very robust with every engagement, giving opportunities to individuals to stretch themselves. That can be
mhm.
very beneficial for the entire audit group because even if we have subject matter experts in some of our specialized work, that subject matter expert may not be available all the time. So the more that we grow and develop our team members, the better for everybody.
Right, exactly, exactly. One an interesting thing happened early on in my career as well, when I was doing a review and I was interviewing someone, and you're running into different people in the course of your work, and in this particular case, the individual was answering questions, and of course, I needed to do some follow-ups and so on. So I kept asking some certain questions, and maybe not the most professional thing that he did at the moment, but his question was, "You're auditing me and asking me all these questions about what I do.
Mhm.
Who audits you?" Right? And of course, it set me back a bit, but take away the lesson from it. I, of course, answered the question and I explained to him that we had a mechanism to verify the quality of the work that we did. So we were also subject to being audited. So
Mhm.
we audit others and other people audit us. So can you elaborate on this matter of quality assurance mechanisms within internal audit that confirms, verifies, and provides recommendation for improvement in the way we do our work? What do the standards say about that?
Absolutely. Well, basically says that there are internal and external aspects to what you just described. So first, there has to be a quality assurance and improvement program. That's standard driven. And again, the chief audit executive has to develop that and maintain that program. And it has to cover all aspects of internal auditing. So the writing, the supervision, the collection of data, all manner of things have to be included in that program. So everything from soup to nuts. And then this program is now going to have two aspects to it, internal aspect and external aspect. That's where 1310 comes in. So there has to be a plan, there has to be a program, and there has to be some internal quality assurance and some external quality assurance assessments.
Can you elaborate on those? Let's begin with the internal one.
Yes. Well, the internal one is covered by its own standard, 1311. Internal assessments must include ongoing monitoring of the performance of the activity. That covers a lot of territory, as you well know, Hernan. And then periodic self-assessments or assessments of other persons within the organization with sufficient knowledge of internal audit practices. So the self-assessment can come from internal. So some people might refer to that as a professional practices group within internal audit, or it could be folks maybe in the area of compliance or in the area of some kind of regulatory reviews. They have enough understanding of it. They could be our assessors as well.
So within the organization, having someone who is going to review, they'll make sure that what we're doing is of high quality, and they need to be knowledgeable about the process of internal auditing. So what does the internal assessment entail?
So what does the internal assessment entail? The external, I'm sorry. The external assessment entails a practice of at least every 5 years, someone from the outside, very independent party, an independent assessor or a team from outside the organization coming in and looking us over, doing their own exploration of the work that we do, the quality of the work, the process itself, team members, everything from soup to nuts. So this has to happen at least every 5 years. And the assessor himself or herself or themselves need to be properly qualified and independent, so that we have to be certain that there's not going to be any conflict of interest in the process, and that we're going to get a true, shall we say, report card of how well we're doing consequent to this review, consequent to this assessment.
So the way I think of it is years 1, 2, 3, and 4, you have the ongoing internal mechanism that's going to take a look, primarily looking at work papers. It may be looking also at surveys that are sometimes conducted by organizations of their clients, getting feedback from them, and so on. So those are the two main things that go into that process, right? Looking at the mechanism of collecting all the information, how the audits are conducted, right? Looking at the budget and documentation and the reporting that happens at the end. And then once every 5 years, a more exhaustive review. And to your point earlier, in terms of who is asked questions about it. So of course we look internally, they look at the work papers, look at the audit plan, the program, looking at the budgets, so on. But they may interview the auditors themselves. They may interview the clients that you have had assurance and consulting engagements with. They may interview the CEO, CFO. They may interview legal. They may interview compliance. They may also interview board members. So it's definitely a more exhaustive. Oh, and training records. I know that is sometimes also looked at as well. Very important that all of these pieces are looked at. So it's very exhaustive. And what typically happens as well is that the party that does this review can then provide best practices. One of the things that I've had a number of conversations with people over the years in many of my classes is best practice in terms of, do we have enough auditors on staff? Is our budget big enough? In those kinds of questions about how do we compare to other organizations? And this is a great opportunity to have someone from the outside review and then provide some metrics. It's not always done. You need to negotiate that in your contract, but quite often they're able to provide some insights related to perhaps how many auditors per $1 billion in sale, or how many auditors per 1,000 employees, and so on, how many audits done per year. Those kind of metrics can provide a little bit of a benchmark to get a sense as to how well you're doing. And if you need additional resources, then they can provide uh, feedback to the audit committee, which is the one that oversees internal audit. So tell us a little bit more about what that report at the end of the external assessment contain, and what are some of the things that happen after that review.
Well, so as you mentioned, there are many benefits to having the external assessment. It is a very, very comprehensive process, and it involves an outside party without conflict of interest. So we know that it is fair, it is impartial, but it also has teeth. It's something that we need to take very, very seriously and be prepared to go through. So Standard 1320 talks about the reporting. The Chief Audit Executive must communicate the results of this quality assurance and improvement program to senior management and the board. And this reporting is quite necessary in the very infrequent cases where there might be nonconformance. So if there are actual findings, sort of analogous to the findings that we might make in the work that we do, that nonconformance be disclosed. Going through this every 5-year process allows us to use a term which is prestigious. We conform with the international standards of the professional practice of internal auditing. This is what Standard 1321 is about. So our team, our chief audit executive can be very confident in being able to use that statement because we've gone through this process. But
So that's like the stamp of approval.
Yeah, the good housekeeping seal of approval, the good auditing seal of approval. That's exactly right. But if there are any corrective actions that I'll use that terminology, but the standard uses the terminology nonconformance. So if there are any situations of nonconformance with the definition, so these have to do with aligning with our standards and with our definition of internal audit and our code of ethics. So if there's anything in that regard that is found to be problematic, then there needs to be a statement made to the leadership of our organization and a corrective action plan in place to return it or to put it right, whatever that may mean. So this, like I said, this is serious. This has teeth.
In many cases, the organization that will do the review, they will render an opinion at the end of this review by labeling the results as fully complies, generally complies, or does not comply. So if you fully comply or generally comply, you usually get the ability to say, yes, we conform with the standards. But if you do not comply, then you cannot.
Right.
And that's a very important thing to also be mindful of, is that this, again, happens at least once every 5 years, and it definitely has an impact on the credibility of internal audit departments. So every effort goes into making sure that you understand the standards, follow the standards, and that you are able to provide a high quality product to our clients, which is definitely what we are here all about. So as we take a look at work papers, then it's been very helpful you walking us through this process, looking at what work paper standards are about, what good quality entails, and how we verify that the work papers and all the work around them is done with high quality, so we can say with confidence that we conform with the standards. So thank you very much, Kathleen.
My pleasure, Hernan.
If you like this series, subscribe to the ACI Learning YouTube channel to enjoy more audit-related content.